About 12 years ago, I was traveling west up the Amazon River, and I was heading for the town of Manus. Around about halfway between the Delta and Manus is the town of Parance. And Parance has a carnival every June. It's called Boy Bomba, and it celebrates a folk tale every June of a bull. It's full of music and song and dance. It's loud, it's raucous, it's enthusiastic, it's wonderful. I enjoy it very much. And when I was there, I asked my local guide, I said, do you know any more folk tales of the area, of the Parance people? Now, Angelo knew everything possible about the ecology of the Amazon. He knew about sociology, he knew about politics, he knew about economics, but he wasn't very good on folk tales. So he gave me an outline of a couple, and that was all. And I put them in that, that memory store, that story store, and they just sat there, just the outlines. Then one day, from a totally unexpected source, this information arrived, and it was a bit not for Angelo, from an entirely different source, and it was part of the story that Angelo had told me. So I thought about it, and I worked on it a little bit, and I put it together, and I think this is probably about as good as you're going to get. So the Parance people did not have fire. They knew about fire. They knew that it would keep them warm. They knew that it would give them light, and they knew that they could cook food with it. And they wanted fire, but they couldn't get fire because the keepers of fire were the vultures. And fire was kept beneath the wing of the king vulture. They had plans to steal it. They would use their blowpipes. They would shoot up at King Vulture, but there was a flaw there, two really. First of all, it's not a good idea to vex the vultures. And secondly, it's not a good idea to shoot a vulture while he's flying. But when he tumbles down, it's quite possible that the fire will fall from under the wing and fall into the Amazon River, and then fire will be lost forever. And so another plan was required. And it was Beira who came up with the plan. He didn't say it out loud because he didn't want the vultures to hear it. He whispered it to his people. Some of them said, "Oh, really, Beira, that is not going to work." Others said, "Oh, really, Beira, I don't, oh, that's gross. I don't think so." And others said, "Oh, really, Beira? No, it's not something I would do, but if you think you'd like to try, well, you try." And Beira thought, "Yeah, I'll try." But he had to visit the elders first, for Beira did not know where he could find King Vulture, but the elders did. The elders mulled over the plan and said, "Well, if you want to do that, you do it." To get to the vultures, first of all, you must travel west through the rainforest. And then you will come to a deep, dark river. That's not the Amazon. You must cross that river. When you get to the bank the other side, face north. Walk along the bank until you come to where that river joins the Amazon. And there you will see a broad plain. On one side flows the Amazon River. The other side of the plain is fringed by the rainforest, and that broad plain is the kingdom of the vultures. For you see, vultures will fly over the forest, and they will fly alongside the forest, but they will not fly into the forest, for the hanging lianas and the vines will entangle their wings. They do not fly into the forest, although they do scavenge on the forest floor. Briara thought, I'll do it. I will find fire for my people. And he set off, turning west through the rainforest. It wasn't difficult for him. It was his land. He knew where the poisonous and the painful plants were. It was quite straightforward until he got to the deep, dark, intimidating river. He looked. He thought, can I? Shall I? And he thought, well, every day I dive into the river. I dive into the river, I grab the great fish in my arms, and I carry them back to the village for supper. So of course, I can try to cross the river. And he waded into that deep, dark river and began to swim. He ached, and he felt himself seeing the spirit of death as he went down into the water. But he made it. He made it to the other side, and he dragged himself exhausted onto the muddy bank and turned north. He tramped along the muddy bank until he got to the confluence where the river met the great Amazon. And there was the plain, the mighty Amazon flowing along one side and the rainforest fringing the other. Briara carefully, slowly, and quietly edged along the rainforest so that vultures could not see him. And just when he came to a small opening, just a tiny gap, he went inside and crouched down. He crouched onto the forest floor and gathered around him debris from that forest floor. He gathered around him a great pile of mouldering wet leaves. And in those leaves were dark, creeping insects. And best of all, with the dark, mouldering leaves and the creeping insects were the great, grey, fat maggots. He scooped it up onto his body, and he covered himself from his toes to his nose. Over the top of his head, as he lay there, he had just his eyes peering upwards. Lay quite still as the maggots and the insects crawled over him. The sun he saw moving round above him. He felt its warmth. He felt the warmth of his body as he lay there under the mouldering mound. And he heard a sound. Zzz, zzz. And as he looked up, zzz, he could see a forest fly buzzing and investigating what was this mouldering mound. Now the forest fly takes messages to the vultures. For when the forest fly buzzes round and round, the vultures hear it and they know that they too should go and investigate. And so it was, as Briara lay there, alongside him, around him, hunched the vultures. What a prize! A huge mouldering mound, and below they thought must be rotting supper. It was such a magnificent prize, the vultures decided that it must be King Vulture who would take the first strip of flesh from the body. And as King Vulture stood astride, with his claws astride Briara's flesh, and his great beak moving forward to tear off that strip of flesh to take back to cook for supper, Briara's hand shot out. He grabbed that fire, and with the other arm he pushed Vulture aside. He rushed to his feet and head down, he ran along that open plain, and he ran as fast as he could, and he could feel the wings of the vulture beating behind him. He could feel the air from the flapping wings moving around the back of his neck, and it was just as he felt the feather of the vulture tap the back of his neck that he moved and veered off into the rainforest, and the vulture, flying in full flight, crashed into the vines, into the lianas, and his wings were wrapped and entangled, and in the rainforest, Bahira felt himself to be safe at last. But his fingertips were tingling. The fire was burning, so he reached down and picked up a large leaf, not too dry, not too wet, and placed the fire on that leaf. Carefully but quickly, he made his way until he reached that river. He looked at the river. He looked at the fire. How was he going to swim across that river carrying the fire? He couldn't allow the fire to fall into the river. He couldn't lose the fire. As he stood there wondering, looking at the fire, looking at the river, he felt a slithering around his ankles. He looked down, just in his ankles, he saw green river snake. Green river snake, if you help me take this fire to the opposite bank, I will share its secrets with you. Without question, Green River Snake agreed, and together they made their way into the water, zigzagging along, zigzagging across that water until Green River Snake began to shout, "Bahira, Bahira, the fire is burning, the fire is burning." And the river snake tossed his head, and the fire shot up into the air, and Green River Snake's head and skin was burnt quite dark brown. And from that day to this, every river snake is brown, green, always brown. And Bahira had caught the fire, and he looked down, and beside him he saw River Prawn. River Prawn, if you help me take this fire safely across the bank, the other side of the river, I will share its secrets with you. And River Prawn, without question, agreed. Fire was placed on River Prawn's whiskers, and slowly, together, they did glide across the water until River Prawn shouted, "Bahira, Bahira, the fire is scorching my whiskers, is singeing my face." He tossed his head, and the fire flew into the air, and River Prawn's face and whiskers were scorched to a dark spice brown. And from that day to this, that creature is known as cinnamon prawn. And Bahira had caught the fire. He looked beside him, and there he saw River Frog. River Frog, if you help me get this fire across the river, I will share it. I will share its secrets with you. And River Frog agreed without question. And the fire was placed in River Frog's mouth. And with his strong back legs, he pushed really hard against the water and encouraged the exhausted Bahira to reach the river bank, and safely they did. And on the bank, River Frog gave a great cough as the fire shot into the air, and Bahira caught it. And safely, he carried it quickly back to his people. When he presented it to his people, they smiled, for they knew that that night, must have been Friday, they would have fried fish for supper. And the elders took the fire, and they kept it safely hidden. For although they searched and searched, the vultures never did find the fire, which is why from that day to this, vultures eat their flesh raw. But what about frog? Now, what does frog eat? Well, frog, when he flicks out his tongue, sometimes he will draw in a big, fat forest fly, juicy and rich. Or sometimes it might be a small, crunchy beetle. At other times, he might just catch a firefly and take it down, down, down into his stomach. And in his stomach, the firefly will glow. And anybody looking from the outside will see that inside the body, warm and alight, glowing like a lamp, is frog. So everybody will know that frog has been the privileged one. He shares the secret of fire with the Parents people. Now, I can see from your faces, one or two of you, you really don't believe this, do you? Let me tell you something. Just Google frog swallows firefly, and you will see on YouTube a frog glowing with a firefly inside his body, lit up like a warm lamp. And I'm sure once you've seen that, you will be convinced, and you will be absolutely sure that that is proof that the story I have told you is absolutely true. Thank you.